So just a quick background for the few folks who don't know Bilal. Bilal is a general partner at Lux Capital. Today we're going to discuss the kind of current investment landscape, specifically around defense tech. It's kind of become a more interesting and more central topic in broader VC. We're going to talk about the larger VC ecosystem as well, what's happening in LLMs and generative AI and China more broadly. And then you also did a recent trip to CENTCOM. And so we're going to talk about that, what you learned. So let's jump right in. First and foremost, the fiscal year 25 defense budget is requested as $850 billion. The 24 budget was $840. But when you remove, that's not growth in the venture in venture terms. Then when you remove kind of personnel costs and hardware costs, there's not a huge pie left typically for the types of markets that venture investors like to get into. But there's been this ramp up of defense tech investing. And so what do you make of that, and what do you think are some of the reasons this is happening?
Even if it's $100 billion, a pretty large market. But I think there's a good point there. So there's a few things. So we've been investing in defense tech for 15 years or so, and certainly over the last 5, 7, 8 years, it's become a very interesting area. Lots of new companies getting founded, and a lot of venture dollars flowing into it. There's two ways to analyze that. One is, frankly, the most important thing that changed was that the founders started to pay attention to this industry. I think a lot of people since probably...
Why do you think that happened?
I think they were tired of optimizing click boxes and ads for Google and whatnot, and said, we want to do something meaningful. We want to build a missionary company. And they were looking at what to do. There was a wave of clean tech that went through Silicon Valley. They thought maybe we can protect climate change, and I think those companies did not succeed. So that same kind of mentality was looking for what's next. So this is part of the
rising tide of hard tech in general.
Yeah, hard tech. I think you should call it, tech that has an impact on human life, creates real value, not just dollar value. And I think those founders, some of them had actually made money before, so they could afford to do this. But that great founders moving into a space generally makes that space more interesting.
Do you think how much do you think it's Palantir, being kind of the first Silicon Valley-esque company that got real traction had to do with it? Because you have a bunch of the Palantir folks.
So Palantir is an amazing company. We're investors in Anduril, and Anduril talks a lot about, hey, in the last 20 years, only 2 multi-billion-dollar companies have been created in national security. New ones is Palantir and SpaceX. And then Palmer, who's the founder of Anduril, also talks about the fact that both of them were started by billionaires. All that is fine, but let's be clear. Anduril is only like a 5-6-year-old company. Palantir, when it was getting ready to go public, people thought it couldn't because it was seen as a services company. They had to sort of tell the market, no, we're actually a product company. And they've done an amazing job since then. So not taking anything away from these companies, I think we should not leave behind the fact that there's actually a lot of people in Silicon Valley that wanted to do something valuable.
Yeah, that are not in that
yes.
friend
and
group,
for a while, they felt that maybe defense is not doing something right. Look, since 2003, the headlines coming out of what military is doing was dropping bombs and drones in Afghanistan and Iraq and Navi in a futile war and what was going on. And I think over time that became slower, and people realized that we do have real tensions around the world. We really do have adversaries. So that's sort of, who's building the companies. On the investment side, the reality is that $100 billion is a very large market, even if it's just that. Right? It's probably much more than that. You have international markets that people are accessing and selling into.
And dual-use companies.
And dual-use companies. And also, you only need a few success stories, right? I mean, if you were an investor in SpaceX, you're not complaining that there are not a lot of space companies, right?
Yeah.
If you're an investor in Palantir, you're not complaining that, out of all graph theory, that network theory that happened.
Can we talk about that a little bit? We had a dinner last night, and I think this wasn't abundantly clear. How how different VCs really think about markets than, let's say, because I think the thing that I'm trying to get at is there's actually a little bit of cynicism in the DC ecosystem about defense tech investing, which is a little confusing, right? It's like, how dare these people come and give us money and fund these companies into existence and create like a great job market specifically in the DC ecosystem. How does the VC mentality work? Which maybe it's not like real estate and it's not like some other industries.
Look, VCs, even though VCs come with certain vintages and every year that you're investing in, there's a certain number of amazing companies that get created. But the reality is that every year there's not more than 5, maybe 10 great companies created in Silicon Valley and the entire tech ecosystem.
The whole industry,
the entire industry,
not
all the VCs, the hundreds or thousands of VCs that you see, they're all trying to be in those 10 companies. We don't know what they are. I mean, that's the unfortunate thing. If we knew, we would get into them. But you want to be in them. And if you're in them, you're done. I mean, if you're a Google investor, you basically don't have to do anything afterwards.
Yeah.
Right? And I think the point is it's a high stake, high beta, high risk, high return environment, which is, by the way, an amazing thing. The venture capital industry that exists in the United States that funds these things that are just ideas, and often skeptical society looks at them as like, this will never amount to anything, but we still do them and we do them at scale. That leads to the most amazing innovations that come out. And frankly, the rest of the world wishes that they had the venture capital industry like we have. Not saying that about myself, that they wish that people like myself existed. But I think the most important thing is that we as a finance function in our country created this high-risk capital that is allowing incredible ideas that are very early and very nascent to be able to do this at scale.
I mean, I think the other thing that probably is underemphasized is for, let's say there's 10 defense tech companies that get funded, let's say 9 of them fail. All the people who worked at those companies learned a lot and became more sophisticated, and actually, the entire ecosystem gets more sophisticated, even though a lot of those companies fail. And I think that's under
100%. And I would say that actually is the biggest weakness of the defense tech startup ecosystem, that we have incredible people who understand technology, we have people who understand engineering and management and so on. But selling into defense, we don't have a lot of people. And most of the people that are there have spent time at either Palantir or SpaceX or a few other companies. Probably the guy who joined 15 years ago, Lockheed Martin, and doing some line sales work, good, but they haven't created it from scratch. They haven't seen high velocity motion. It's a difference. So we do not have, when it comes down to selling to military, which is a very complex sale that everybody here understands, the fact that you have your user, your customer, and a payer are 3 completely different entities who don't talk to each other very much. It's a real problem. And we don't have enough talent right now that is experienced enough to do that at scale. So if you're a new startup, that's your biggest problem. A startup gets funded in Silicon Valley to sell into the military. The first thing they do, they ask their investors, so I want to be dual use. I think there's a great use case for the military. What do I do? And frankly, most board members, if they haven't done defense tech investing, would be like, they would give stupid advice. You will hear things like, what you really need is to hire a 4-star general on your board. Well, okay, maybe that's the right thing to do. Maybe not. Oh, what you really need is to hire...
They didn't become a 4-star general by being great at sales.
Well, or they would say you need to hire somebody who's a lobbyist for Congress. Well, lobbying for what? Right? Or you need to have somebody who's worked at the Pentagon, or you need somebody from the acquisition side. The reality is you might need all of the above in various ways. But now you're a 3-person company in Silicon Valley. You can't hire like 6 people in DC to do that. So figuring that out is an art more than science right now. And I think companies that become good at executing at that are able to get real success. And then you have companies that have been around to raise a lot of money and frankly can get traction in the defense sector.
The other thing about funding the 9 failures is when that company that starts doing well emerges, a lot of people go to that company. So it becomes this magnet. And so the momentum kind of takes over. And that happens in the Bay Area all the time. There's a couple of organizations within the ecosystem that have had a huge role. DIU is one of them. Almost a 10x increase in budget from last year. What are your thoughts on the emerging role of an organization like that and kind of going forward?
So DIU is now in its 3rd iteration, right? and the first two faced stiff resistance. And even though it was created by the Department of Defense itself, so it's not like some outside organ rejection.
Fund,
It was an internal organ rejection for a while. However, DIU persisted. DIU's leadership persisted. There were champions within the military, DoD, Pentagon, who persisted. And I think they finally, that their persistence and their advocacy, including advocacy with people like us who then advocated on their behalf that this needs to be a position that reports directly to the secretary, et cetera, et cetera. All of that coincided with a realization within the military that maybe everybody else that's telling us that we have a technology deficit may be right. And maybe we need to find a way to not be developing technology at the R&D stage, which is what the SBIR programs tend to be, but also not only at the testing and evaluation scale, which is really what most of the contracts that most startups have had over the last 20 years tend to be, but we need to do that at operational scale. And we need to get them into the field, and there's no way of doing that. Right? And doing so required you to be able to circumvent the traditional programs of records and in accelerating field deployments. And hence, we need to give them the kind of budget that enables that to happen.
If you've invested in, let's say, 3 seed defense tech startups, do you tell them, hey, DIU is the area to focus? What's your advice in that?
DIU is one of the areas to focus. The first thing you learn as a VC, the first thing you learn is there's no silver bullet. There's no...
The market's efficient. It closes up roles.
And to be honest, and I don't mean it in as bad as it may sound, it's also not a very fair world. Okay? I mean, let's be clear. PayPal mafia led to SpaceX, which led to, Anduril or Palantir, which led to Anduril, which led and a whole bunch of VCs who were investing in them. Half of them probably worked at PayPal at some point. I mean, so there's like a little mafia. Right? So if you're like a random person who went to Santa Clara State University and you're like, I really care about defense tech, it's not exactly the easiest thing for you to break into it, right? And I mean, this happens all the time, unfortunately, in defense tech, and we got to fix that.
Venture. I mean, I think like Y Combinator's role in many ways was to come in and say, the old adage was in order to get the intro to Sequoias, you need to know somebody who knew a Sequoia partner, and there's like 6 Sequoia partners. So YC just said, hey, you can apply online and we'll take all comers. And that's a huge outcome.
My thing to DIU every time I meet them, Doug and everybody else, I'm like, you're doing an amazing job. Just make sure that you don't get caught in a room with like 8 people who are only ones giving you advice. Right? There's an entire industry out there that's doing amazing stuff. What America does not need is that we have 5 primes, let's create a 6th prime, and then we're done. Whoa, amazing success. No, that's not what we need. Okay, maybe we don't need 100 primes, but we certainly need more winners. We need great technology. Technology goes through waves. Like, it's AI now. 2 years ago, it was crypto before people ended up in jail. And before that, it was, autonomous cars. And before that, it was drones. And before that, it was SaaS. And before that, it was gaming. And before that, it was local social mobile. And, Facebook was going to bring governments down around the world.
And that's all within like 10 years.
And this is in the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah, it's not a long
right?
time. Yeah.
So who knows what's coming next?
Yeah.
Right. So DoD thinking long term has to be planning for this will come and is coming faster and faster. And we got to be prepared to be able to bring that in. And as I said, bring it at an operational scale into the field and be used.
What type of companies are you seeing founders start right now in the seed? Companies under 10 employees, are any themes that you're seeing in defense tech?
Have you heard of this thing called AI?
Yeah.
So while we're talking here about defense tech, and it almost sounds like everybody's thinking of defense tech, 99% of the people in Silicon Valley are right now thinking about AI broadly. And
large language models, generative AI.
Large language models, generative AI, a bunch
defense tech is like a rounding error of a rounding error.
Correct. Hard to do, hard to sell into, frankly, hard to fundraise for. But we're built to do hard things. At Lux, at least, we say do things that are hard because that's what you get paid for.
And if you like hard tech, it's quite attractive.
Well, and I think you build generational companies, right? We're not building a company to sell to Google. We're building a company that will be the next Google. And, there's when was the last time Lockheed Martin bought a company for $10 billion? That was a startup. When was the last time Boeing did that? General Dynamics did that. So that exit does not exist. So companies like yourself have to stand alone and be the company that's going to be the standalone public entity like Palantir is today or like SpaceX is today. And on one hand, you'll be encouraging other entrepreneurs that look at you and they'll be like, we can do that too. So that's great. And then you will be the consolidator of other technologies as well and say, hey, we have a path to market and we can accelerate that. Let's bring you in and give you equity to be a part of our story. I think that's going to happen. In Silicon Valley, it's about AI right now. It's a massive, there's a big technological shift that's happened over the last few years in AI. I think it's very powerful. I think it's very important. Amazing companies are likely going to be built there, but also there's a lot of hype. There's a lot of fluff. There's a lot of nonsense.
Is that required? I feel like in every single, all these mini cycles you talked about, there's huge investments that were made. So maybe another way to put it is, let's say, are we going to, is the VC industry going to burn $50 billion in this space if they haven't already? I think maybe that's sort of threshold.
Probably more than that.
$100 billion in the broad AI space, not AI and defense tech, broad AI space. Is that required?
Probably yes, and probably it's fine. Every bubble has generated incredible companies, right? Like we were gaming. I mean, think of how many telecommunication companies went out of business post 2001, right? But the bandwidth and the infrastructure they laid in place made sure that all of us only needed the last mile connectivity to have the access to high bandwidth network. The same thing happened in the .com era, right? Like all of these companies went under, but then emerged companies like Amazon and so on, eBay and so on. Google emerged in roughly the same time frame. So yes, I mean, how many photo sharing apps were there? And now, none. Nobody shares photos.
I mean, there's like over a dozen.
Yes, but
I mean, just doing that. Yeah.
But I think it's fine. Autonomous cars world, even close to our own world. Like how many autonomous car companies? There were like 9 LiDAR companies that went public, right? And that's okay. A whole bunch of people lost money, but it's a high risk. Going in that this is a high risk, high reward business, most likely that you will lose your money, which is why having a prepared mind, but more importantly, I myself see as a venture capitalist, I'm not just placing bets. Right? There's a misnomer that all you have to do is just give money to somebody and walk
10
away.
10 companies, just then one.
It doesn't work that way. You and I mean, you do 99.999% of the work, but at least there's 0.0001% of the work that I got to put in to be able to, first earn a seat to sit next to you, and second, to help you win. And I think that is what it takes, and it takes over time, and it starts to compound. And the benefit of hard tech is that you don't end up with 55 competitors. That you have a few competitors, and you know what? If there are few competitors, market is large enough for everyone.
Yeah. I guess the misnomer in that question is all that money is wasted. It's not. I mean, just like we said in defense tech, all those folks who learn AI at failing companies then possess those skills to go on do interesting things. I want to bring it back here a little bit to the context at hand. The other organization, which is kind of important for us and the kind of emerging tech ecosystem within defense, is Jake went to a CDAO. What do you think of this? The organization, $400 million in terms of budget for the year. Obviously, a topic that we an organization we talk about all the time. What are they doing correct? What could they do doing better? And what do you think their role is? We already talked about DIU. What do you think their role is going forward?
I think the first and the foremost thing is to appreciate, in my opinion, and congratulate that there's a higher degree of realization that AI and data-focused organization is what the DoD is going to be. Right? It's going to be software first, and then within software is going to be AI first. I think this is, putting mechanics aside, I think this is elevating the game a little bit. But the most important thing is AI doesn't happen where you just buy some software. You have to build an entire infrastructure around it. Right? You have to have governance policies around ethics in AI. You have to have training of people who know how to use and deploy these things at scale. You need to have technology integrations that need to be built with all the various companies that are out there. You need to have internal policies on how you're going to actually deploy that and the infrastructure that needs to get built. Will you have on-prem and cloud? So there's a lot of work to be done. Just like any other large enterprise that decides that we're going to go big into AI, that's what they're going to do. I think there's a lot of work to be done. To be honest, $400 million is not enough. Right? Just think about Microsoft
Yeah.
and OpenAI, and how much money has Microsoft given to OpenAI to just build one set of apps, right? One thing, right? And it's like what, 10, $20 billion at this point?
Yeah.
And we're talking about $400 million to get all this going. So I don't think I think we need to do more. It is the future. Like it just what we consider, and we grew up with. Well, where we grew up with, desktop computers, but the idea of an app is going to change. You're going to build apps in real time. You will tell AI, this is what I need to do, and voila, an app will get created. Or some agentic workflow where normal English will say, I would like to get a data from there and turn that into this, and then automate this function. And the agents will create an entire workflow that will do that, call multiple models or whatever will need to be done. When I was, you said going to CENTCOM, that was part of the story. Right? You're in the field and you realize how different. We're talking about science fiction stuff when we're sitting in Silicon Valley and discussing defense tech. And you go to the field and you realize this is another world out there.
Yeah.
They're like sitting around waiting to get email access. Right?
Yeah.
They're like shouting across the hallway because they don't have, the alliance partners are not on the same nipper-sipper network as the other guys. So, to solve all of these kinds of problems, I think AI has a role to play, and we need an agency that coordinates all of that function across.
So you're a proponent of a much larger organization that has more influence.
Yes, and influence, and it is building out across the board functions that are required. I mean, it should not be just a general that talks about, we do things with responsibility and ethics. There's actually real technologies around explainable AI, model observability, data provenance, and all of that stuff that needs to get implemented at the technology scale. So it is no longer just a human decision. It is human decision aided by a lot of technology and a lot of data. But all of that needs to be implemented across implementations of AI. AI will get used in veterans administration. It will be used in payroll. It will be used in all the functions. Like you said, most of the money of DoD budget goes to just maintain our workforce and our existing equipment sustainment. Yeah. Right? All of that needs to get more efficient. So we're not spending hundreds of billions of dollars maintaining a force that we hope to not ever use. We hope to never have people in the field battling it out. We hope to never have old, tanks rolling in the desert, but we have to maintain them until we figure out the alternatives.
I do want to touch on China a little bit. The Chinese ecosystem, venture ecosystem, the defense tech ecosystem, very, very different. What can we learn as either a venture community, as startup founders, or members of the government in terms of moving our values and our mission forward?
China is an adversary, a real formidable adversary. China has its eyes set on American domination and dislodging us with that. We've had tons of economic security and advantage because of our position around the world as effectively the sole superpower for many years. China kicks ass. China is good.
China is good in technology. One of the earlier when we had the videos and one of the questions from the panel, Jason was asking, well, what do you guys think of this? And my response to that question was,
we should be scared.
Shit, we should be scared.
Yeah.
Our team is the one that went out and benchmarked there. It is surprising how sophisticated the automotive industry within China has become in the last 5 years.
100%.
It is sobering.
100%.
Absolutely sobering.
And not only are they good, they're getting better. We're not dealing with a bunch of country bumpkins. These are highly trained engineers.
With the giant markets.
Yes, they may not be.
Resources.
They may not have the experience that the U.S. industrial base has in developing technologies at scale. They may, when Tesla's cars came out, now it is a $600 billion business or whatever it is. When Tesla cars came out, all the skeptics were like, these guys don't know how to build anything. The fucking doors make noise and they don't close properly. And guess what?
Most valuable car company on the planet.
Correct. The Chinese the same way. You can say all you want that, it got stuck here and didn't do anything, or this thing, my brother bought a car. It's not a Chinese car, but a Japanese car, but it came and all the instructions in Japanese and no manuals, right? So you may end up in that situation around the world, but the reality is they'll fix all of this in the next few years. And defense focus, unlike here, those companies with the civil military alignment that they have, all that technology is in real time being handed over to the government and the military side, and vice versa. They're being tested at scale. We here are like banning taxis running around in streets where they're very safe. Like if you go to San Francisco, please come and I'll take you for a ride in Waymo cars. But in China, that restriction is not there. So they're getting a lot more real world training data all the time, right? Automotive industry alone is a multi-trillion-dollar industry globally. Most of it is focused right now, the building of the cars in a few countries in the West. United States, Germany, a few other countries, obviously Japan and Korea. But the rest of the world needs cars too. And that's the market to be had. So China sees this as a huge impetus to have its economic security and national security by building these vehicles so that the US government, so governments around the world buying their cars not only from China, but also military vehicles from China. Why not?
So what's the takeaway for us? Other than,
I think we can't tariff our way out of this. We got to focus on having a long-term strategy. We got to move fast. We got to be bold. I think, VCs alone can't do this. I mean, no way. We need to do implementations in the field. We need to, remove bureaucracy. Somebody said earlier in one of the panels that the policy deficit in DoD or Pentagon is higher than the technology deficit. I think that was well stated. Every now and then I tell founders all the time, okay, you have this amazing technology that does whatever. Stop. That's great. We'll talk about that. But how are you going to sell? If you don't know how to sell into the DoD, it doesn't matter what you're building, right? We need to get past that so that we can talk about technology and we have a method of selling into the DoD.
Let's, in the few minutes we have remaining, I want to talk about your CENTCOM visit. You recently visited. Tell us why you went in the first place. And then
most VCs have never served in the military. Most of us who were technologists came.
Most VCs have never worked, but that's a broader point.
Yes, that too. Or they were young kids
we can
who
edit
showed
that
up in
out later
Silicon
in the
Valley
video.
and frankly never served. I mean, maybe they had a job but never served, right? So they don't really understand what that means to serve. Okay, where you're getting not paid a lot of money, where you're in the desert. I was literally just talking to somebody who was like, oh yeah, I was there in 2003 in Iraq, and and there was there was a freshly mowed desert show up, right? So part of the reasoning for CENTCOM to do this, I think SOCOM may have been actually the first one under T2 to invite some of the VCs to go and visit the AOR, but this was General Kurilla at CENTCOM who said, I'd like you to come in. It was only 5-6 people, and it was, I was the VC when there was other CEOs, to see how technology actually gets used in the field. But also more importantly, what do they actually do and how do they do it? And I think there was a great realization on human side, I think, understanding what it means for people to have respect for their job and respect for the opportunity that they have to serve. And doing so in many ways, they're not doing it for money. Okay.
Yeah,
they're doing it because it's a real sense of mission and commitment towards the government. I think that's really important for us to understand. Yes, I'm optimizing for money. I want to make sure you go public someday or whatever. But reality is you're saving lives. You're protecting our defenses. You're protecting our security, our freedoms, and all of that stuff. I think that becomes very real when you're there. Otherwise, it's like nonsensical. Having a gold-plated dinner with $25,000 with a presidential candidate, you don't really understand what serving means. The second thing was to really see and understand that the difference between operating at scale and operating in a research environment.
Yeah.
Right. Moving a large vessel's direction is very, very hard. So we learned that. And then the third thing was, frankly, to also realize, what do we need to build? We need to figure out what that is.
How do founders of companies, unless you're served and you're a founder who previously served, how do founders of young companies that are very small, that don't have access to folks like T2 and et cetera, how do they get an understanding of the day-to-day issues so the defense startup that they're working on actually build something that the market needs? So
number one, there are champions of innovation within the DoD. We need to highlight them, find them, and highlight them. T2 was one of them. General Kurilla is another one of them, but there's several others. The second is...
Look at the panelists today, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And the second, you're not going to figure out a young person's not going to figure out based on some website somewhere that this is what the DoD is looking for, and 700-line list that this month please submit. So that's not the way to do this. It's actually real-time engagements. Now, CENTCOM, for example, is looking for technologists in residence. They want to create programs where people who are in technology companies can actually go and spend a week or a month or 3 months there, either partially in Tampa, partially in the field, to go figure out what is happening. Every company that gets deployment, even if it's a test deployment, when I was there, I saw Forterra's trucks there, the autonomous mobility company. They had people there, right? I saw Anduril had people there. So if people who have deployments in the field can send people there, I think we need to find a way for other people to be able to do the same. It's not going to be easy. It's a lot of work for the military to do that. But I think if we're going to create this nexus, as we said, Nexus 24, nexus between Silicon Valley technology companies and DoD, we need to bridge that gap, and we need to make it easy to go back and forth.
Last question, in red and in bold. I think some of the military guys in the team are really asking this. Which dining facility in CENTCOM had the best dessert? I feel like this is a wasted question, but it's
not a waste of a
bold
question.
And it's in red.
Every 3 times a day, I look forward to going to the DFAC. And free food, everybody told me it's terrible food. It's excellent food. I don't know what you guys are talking about. You get the burgers and steaks and the pies and the free ice cream. It was amazing. I have to say, Army was the biggest facility, had the most variety, but it was very clear. Air Force has the most money. And the Navy guys were poor. Like, I think I had to pay at the Navy, even though I was one of their guests. But it was clear that, look, it's the one place where everybody comes together 3 times a day. I was with, obviously, a whole bunch of soldiers and stuff. But even I started recognizing people after a while. Oh, yeah,
you have to pick one, though.
You're the Camp Arifjan guys.
You have to pick one.
Oh, I would say I had the best food at Camp Arifjan.
All right.
In Kuwait.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Bilal.
Thank you.